So turning now to Aristotle's contribution to ethical theory, we want to note first that, again, Aristotle stands in this ancient tradition of seeing the central question of ethics as being, how can I be happy? How can I live a good life? Or what is the summum bonum, the highest good for human beings? And it's indeed with this question that he begins his ethics. One way to answer the question, what is the highest good for human beings, is to ask the question, well, what is it that we all pursue? What do we all seek? And that question is easy enough to answer. We all seek happiness. We all want to be happy. But a couple points about happiness here. First of all, to say that we all seek happiness and that happiness is our highest good isn't very contentful. It's not very informative unless we know what happiness consists in. So what is it to be happy? Is it to have wealth? Is it to have power? Is it to have fame? What does happiness consist in? In addition to that, Aristotle thinks that whatever the highest good is has got to be something that we value and pursue for its own sake and not for the sake of something else. So, for example, consider wealth. There's nothing wrong with pursuing wealth. There's nothing wrong with the pursuit of money in itself. But money can't be the thing that our highest good consists in. Why? Well, we desire money for the sake of something else. We desire money for that which it can bring us, the material goods we want to buy, the power or security that comes along with whatever it is. So wealth can't be understood, just for example, as the highest good because it's not something that we seek in and for its own sake. Whatever our highest good is, whatever true happiness consists in, it's got to be something that we desire for its own sake. And that makes sense. You don't say, I want to be happy in order to achieve or to acquire X or Y. You just want to be happy, full stop. Second point about happiness. The term that we translate happiness here is the term eudaimonia. This is another one of those terms that's very tricky to translate into English. It does carry the connotation of happiness, but it's not happiness in the sense of a kind of state of contentment or enjoyment or feeling pleasure. It's rather the process or the way of being that leads to the well-being of the individual. It's a certain activity that contributes to the full flowering of human potential. So he's got a much more expansive notion of what the goal of the ethical life is. I think it helps to keep that in mind because Aristotle makes a move here that have puzzled some people. He begins with the question, what is good for human beings? And then he right away shifts to the question, what is it to be a good human being? What's the good for human beings? And then what is it to be a good human being? And for modern people like us, we might say, well, those are two very different questions. But again, given the assumptions that Aristotle is bringing to the table and this classical link between virtue and happiness, it makes a lot of sense that he would proceed in this manner. So now, given this background, we're now in position to look at the distinctives of Aristotle's ethical theory, beginning with his famous function argument in the Nicomachean Ethics. Now, the function argument is simple enough in outline. Basically, what it says is this. If you want to know what the good for something is, you've got to know what its characteristic feature is or what its function is. In order to do that, you've got to know what sort of form or essence sets it apart from other things. We already know what sets apart human beings from other animals is our possession of a rational soul. So it follows that in order to be a good human being, to function well as a human being, it's got to be connected somehow to the use or to the right use of our reason, of our rational natures. And that's in fact what he says. So living well for Aristotle is a virtuous activity which is led by the right use of reason. So now that you know what it is in broad outline to live a good life and how reason is supposed to be deployed, the question then becomes, how can I make myself into a virtuous person? What do I need to do in order to accomplish this? Well, for Aristotle, you can't think of his ethics as consisting in a kind of rule set where you're supposed to memorize a bunch of rules that should govern your conduct and then access them as the circumstances or the occasion calls for it. Rather, what you need to do in order to know what the particular virtues are or how to live and think and behave virtuously is to find a virtuous person, a so-called moral exemplar, who you can learn from, observe, and imitate. You want to learn how to reason practically and to respond to circumstances in a kind of second-natured way, in the way that this person does. So this leads to a related point. For Aristotle, again, it's not about memorizing a bunch of rules that you then access and apply to whatever your circumstances are in a mechanical way. Instead, for Aristotle, it's a matter of habituating yourself by creating within yourself, through imitation and through practice, the sorts of emotions and feelings that are appropriate in particular circumstances and that lead to virtuous conduct within those circumstances. Aristotle memorably said, "One hot day does not make a summer." So if suppose I'm trying to work on the virtue of patience, being a patient person doesn't consist in trying to suppress the feelings of irritation that come up in irritating circumstances, or forcing myself on one occasion after another to exercise patience even though I don't feel like it. That's not what the virtue of patience is. So Aristotle's ethics doesn't focus on your actions as though they were somehow in classes by themselves or external to you. It focuses on the virtuous character and the actions that flow naturally from it. Now, as I've said, in order to learn the virtues, Aristotle thinks that you've got to identify a moral exemplar and learn from them. Still, something more can be said to put some meat on the bones of what virtues are, what moral virtues are, according to Aristotle. And so he's famous for the so-called golden mean. This is his basic idea. Virtues lie between two extremes. The virtue of, courage lies between an excess of courage, which we would call rashness, and a deficiency of courage, which we would call cowardice. So if you have the virtue of courage, that doesn't mean you never feel fear. It means you feel or experience the appropriate amount of fear to the occasion, and it means you choose your battles, as we say, wisely. Or again, having the virtue of generosity is a mean between two extremes of miserliness and profligacy or irresponsible liberality on the other side of the ledger, and so on for each of the virtues. This fact that he seeks a kind of mean between extremes, and in particular the fact that he directs us toward moral exemplars whose behavior we can imitate and cultivate in order to cultivate within ourselves the right feelings and the right position of the heart and right virtuous conduct, is quite similar to the next great philosopher that we'll study, namely the great Confucius.